In 2019, one man convinced the most powerful investors on the planet that his office rental company was worth $47 billion. Not $47 million, $47 billion. For context, that made it more valuable than Ford, Twitter, and Marriott hotels combined. His company had beer taps on every floor. They threw parties that made Coachella look like a board meeting. Employees described working there as joining a cult, and they meant it as a compliment. Wall Street was lining up to hand him billions. SoftBank, one of the largest investment funds in human history, poured over $10 billion into his vision. The world genuinely believed this man was the next Steve Jobs. 13 months later, the whole thing had completely collapsed. The IPO imploded in real time. The valuation cratered by over 75% in a matter of weeks. He was thrown out of his own company, and in the most insane twist in modern business history, walked away with a $1.7 billion golden parachute for destroying it. This is the story of WeWork, a company that wasn't just brought down by bad luck or bad timing. It was brought down by one man's staggering, jaw-dropping, almost unbelievable arrogance. Real quick before we get into it, if you want to see the full story of how WeWork actually started, drop a comment below and we'll make the Rise video. Because trust me, that story is just as insane. Now, let's get into the fall. To understand how spectacular this implosion was, you first need to understand just how seductive WeWork's story was. The idea was simple. It was 2010. The economy had just been destroyed by the financial crash. Office buildings across New York were half empty. A young Israeli entrepreneur named Adam Neumann spotted the opportunity. He would lease those empty floors cheaply, renovate them into beautiful, buzzing spaces, rent out individual desks and offices to freelancers and startups who couldn't afford a whole office on their own. On paper, that sounds like a pretty ordinary real estate business. Adam Neumann was anything but ordinary. He was 6'5", magnetic, and spoke with the intensity of a man who'd personally received instructions from God. And he had a gift. He could make renting a desk sound like joining a revolution. WeWork wasn't just office space, he said. It was a community, a movement, a physical social network. He taught constantly about elevating the world's consciousness. He told investors WeWork would one day be worth $1 trillion. He said publicly, "Nothing less than changing the world interests me." And here's the thing, it was working. The offices were genuinely incredible. Free beer on tap, rooftop terraces, neon signs with motivational quotes, yoga studios, events every night. People didn't just go to WeWork to work. They went because it felt like being part of something bigger than themselves. By 2014, WeWork was the fastest-growing leaseholder of office space in New York. By 2016, it had exploded into 111 cities across 29 countries. By 2019, SoftBank had invested so much money that WeWork hit a valuation of $47 billion, making it the second most valuable startup in the United States, behind only Uber. The empire looked completely untouchable. But beneath the exposed brick and the free beer, something was very, very wrong, and the cracks were about to become craters. Here's the thing nobody wanted to say out loud while the party was raging. WeWork was not a tech company, it was a real estate company, and it was built on a financial model that was a ticking bomb. The entire business worked like this. WeWork would sign a long-term lease on a building, sometimes 15 or 20 years. They'd spend millions renovating it. Then they'd rent out individual desks and offices to tenants on short-term agreements, sometimes just month to month. Do you see the problem? WeWork was locked into decades of payments to landlords, but their tenants could walk out the door tomorrow. The second the economy dipped, or the second something disrupted demand for office space, WeWork would be left holding billions in lease obligations with nobody to fill the seats. By 2018, WeWork had $47 billion in long-term lease obligations on the books, but their tenants were only committed to paying them around $4 billion. That is a $43 billion gap. And here's the kicker. In 2018, WeWork lost $1.6 billion on revenue of just $1.8 billion. They were burning nearly $1 for every dollar they made. Any rational investor looking at those numbers would have walked. But Adam Neumann had convinced the world that WeWork was a tech company, and tech companies are allowed to lose money while they scale. He used the language of Silicon Valley to disguise the economics of a landlord, and it worked brilliantly for a while. Because while analysts were starting to ask uncomfortable questions, Neumann was busy doing something that tells you everything you need to know about how he actually ran WeWork. He trademarked the word "we" personally through a private company he owned. Then, and I want you to let this sink in, he forced WeWork to pay him $5.9 million for the right to use the word "we" in their own company name, the company that he ran, that he was the CEO of. He charged his own company nearly $6 million to use a single word. When this became public, the backlash was instant. Neumann was forced to give the money back. The damage to his credibility was done, and the IPO was coming.
In August 2019, WeWork did what every unicorn startup dreams of. They filed for an IPO, public stock offering that would let regular investors buy into the company and make Neumann and his early backers unfathomably rich. To do this, WeWork had to publish an S-1, a legal document showing investors exactly how the company's finances worked. And the moment that document went public, it was over. Analysts tore through the filing and couldn't believe what they were reading. The losses were catastrophic. The lease obligations were staggering. The business model was fundamentally broken. But it wasn't just the numbers. The document revealed that Neumann had personally borrowed $700 million from WeWork's investors while simultaneously running the company. He had purchased buildings himself, then leased them back to WeWork, essentially paying his own rent with investor money. His wife, Rebecca, had been given veto power over who would succeed him as CEO if he died or became incapacitated. She had also launched a $36,000 a year primary school inside WeWork with a curriculum that included farming, yoga, and the mission to unleash every human's superpowers. The Wall Street Journal published a devastating investigation 35 days after the IPO was filed. By the end of that week, WeWork's valuation had been slashed from $47 billion to under $10 billion. Banks that had been lining up to fund the IPO started backing away. SoftBank, the company that had poured $10 billion into WeWork, told Neumann the IPO needed to be canceled. 4 days after the Journal investigation dropped, Adam Neumann resigned as CEO. Wait, it gets worse, or better depending on how you look at it. If you're watching this and thinking, this is insane, hit subscribe, because we've got a whole series of these coming. Now back to the story. Adam Neumann, the man who had driven WeWork into the ground, walked away with close to $1.7 billion. SoftBank paid him that money just to leave. Meanwhile, the 2,400 employees who were laid off in the weeks after the IPO collapse, they got nothing. The stock options they had spent years working for were worthless. People who had poured their careers into WeWork's mission, all those speeches about community and changing the world, left with severance packages if they were lucky. New management came in and tried desperately to stabilize the company. They sold off the $36,000 school, they shut down the apartment business, they cut costs everywhere they could. Then in 2020, the pandemic arrived, and it finished the job. Almost overnight, the entire global workforce started working from home. Nobody needed a WeWork desk. The $47 billion empire was now a ghost town of empty offices and 15-year lease obligations that still had to be paid. WeWork went public in 2021 through a backdoor stock deal, but the losses continued to mount. $11.4 billion in losses over 3 years. On November 6, 2023, 13 years after Adam Neumann rented his first desk in a Manhattan loft, WeWork filed for bankruptcy. The $47 billion empire was gone. And Adam Neumann, he was already working on his next company, a real estate startup. He even tried to buy WeWork back out of bankruptcy. The audacity was breathtaking. WeWork's collapse is usually told as the story of one reckless, delusional man, and Adam Neumann was certainly those things. But the real story is bigger than one person, because Neumann didn't fool a room full of idiots. He fooled SoftBank, one of the most sophisticated investment operations in the world. He fooled JP Morgan, he fooled Goldman Sachs, he fooled an entire generation of venture capitalists who wrote him blank checks and told him to dream bigger. The real lesson of WeWork is what happens when an entire industry decides that the rules of business no longer apply to the right person with the right story. They confused charisma with competence. They confused growth with value. They confused someone who was very good at talking about changing the world with someone who was actually capable of doing it. WeWork had a genuinely great product. People loved those offices. The idea was real. But somewhere between the first desk and the $47 billion valuation,
The mission got completely buried under the ego of the man leading it. You can be the most magnetic person in the room. You can make people believe in things they've never seen before. But eventually, always, reality shows up. And reality doesn't care how good your speech was.